Hi everyone and welcome back to Rough Rider, where every week I talk writing, self-publishing, and living in a barely literate society. So I try to keep it rated PG on this channel, but this one's gonna be a little different. Today we're gonna be talking about writing sex scenes for your next novel. So sex scenes are not always the easiest thing to write. They can be awkward for you as the writer if you're not used to writing this kind of thing, and it can be awkward for the reader too if they're not used to that kind of content. But there are times when a sex scene will really help drive your plot along, so that's when you're gonna have to learn to work through your discomfort. So there's nothing I can do to make it less uncomfortable for you when your parents read it, but there are some things you can do to make it easier for everyone else. So the first thing you can do to make your sex scenes less awkward is to not write porn. I think that's one of the most important things to keep in mind when you're writing this, is that you're not writing pornographic material here. You know, if you're intentionally writing in like the erotica genre, then feel free to go as dirty as you want. But if this is just your average novel, like general fiction or like sci-fi, fantasy, anything like that, then you're gonna want to steer clear of the kind of pornographic descriptions that can turn like decent literature into just smut. For me at least, the main element that distinguishes classy written sex from just porn is the vocabulary that you're using. And, you know, of course you can write like a little dirty. Your characters don't always have to be making like sweet, gentle love to each other. But if you overuse vulgar slang, especially words for body parts, it can be kind of off-putting, it can take away from the scene, and it might not even really match with the rest of your book in terms of the language that you're using. You know, if your book didn't really have a lot of explicit language in it, then you probably shouldn't be just randomly throwing in vulgar things, like very crass language. It's just not gonna fit. So your reader's gonna look at this and be like what is going on here? So if you can find subtler ways to refer to sexual things, I would go that route. You know, if you want to drop the word like cock once, go right ahead. But if you use it every time and just, you know, just alternating between like cock, dick, like all of that sort of stuff, you know, talking about the girl's vagina or something, and you're saying like, you know, her pussy, like it's just I don't know, I think it's too much. So just replace it with a different word, one that's just as suggestive but doesn't have to be considered vulgar. Say like manhood or something, and if you're talking about penis, or if you want to use the verb like fuck or something, like he fucked her, say like he ravished her. So like, I don't know, like just pick something, like pull out a thesaurus and find a different word, because if you're going to be using curse words like that, you might as well just be writing porn at this point. And you know, you could sprinkle these vulgarities in every so often. That's okay, especially if the sex is supposed to be a little raunchy. But I wouldn't rely exclusively on that kind of explicit language. You know, it's just going to catch your readers off guard if they're not used to that from you, and it's just going to make it more awkward. So the second thing you can do to make your sex scenes less awkward is to not write stage directions. This kind of goes hand in hand with what I was just talking about, but a sex scene is going to be less uncomfortable if you don't choreograph the whole thing. You don't need to take the reader step by step through your character's sexual experience. Like you don't need it to be that they're just reading like a script for a porn movie, where it'll be like, first you start in this position, then they move to this, then they move to that, like they start standing up and then they're lying down and then it's doggy style from behind. Like you don't need to do any of that. It's just, it's weird, it's mechanical, it's just very empty, like there's no depth to it. And just like real life, fictional sex is better when it just happens organically. Like you don't need it to be so formulaic like that. So this is a mistake I made when I was writing the Aetherverse. When you focus too much on the specific actions, then it just becomes kind of meaningless. Like I didn't spend enough time focusing on how these actions may have felt, or you know, what was going through the characters' heads at the time, or what it meant to them. It just doesn't work when you do it like that. And I don't want to really generalize, but I feel like male writers have a tendency to do this because we're so visual when it comes to sex that it's just kind of a natural tendency for us to want to describe only the visual details, as if you're writing what a peeping Tom would see if they were watching your characters do it. So, you know, you could throw in a line or two about what position they're in if you want, but I just don't see that is something that's that important. It just gets boring and like overly linear if you do it that way, if you're just listing out what they're doing. You don't need to give the reader a bulleted list of sex moves that your characters use. You wouldn't write a regular scene so mechanically. You know, you're talking in a scene about what characters are doing, but you don't have to give every single detail, what they're doing with their hands, or you know, where in the room they're walking, like what position they're in. Like you don't need to really do any of that. So I don't see why you would need to do it in a sex scene either. So I ended up editing all that out. It got way better. after I did that. You want your characters to let loose and enjoy the ride. And the same goes for your readers. Too much direction like that just kind of stifles people's imagination, and it's just not necessary. So that leads me to the third thing you can do to make your sex scenes less awkward, which is to focus on sensations. So, I've told you what not to write, so now it's time to talk about what you should write. So sex is a sensory experience, so it would make sense to focus on that, like focus on how people are physically feeling during it, what they're perceiving through their senses. Does your character feel the heat of their partner's breath on their neck or something? Do they feel sweat dripping down their brow? Do they feel their heart pounding in their chest, or like feel flushed? Maybe they hear skin on skin like that. Or, if you're saying that they're like holding each other close, like go a step further and talk about how, you feel that like tingling on your skin when you're that close to another person. Like it's almost like sort of like an energetic feeling on the surface of your skin. Like talk about that, like it's almost like a magnetic, like there's a pull there, like they're just inches away and they're so excited to touch each other. It's more interesting than just saying like they held each other close or they stood close to each other. If you're talking about orgasm, like don't just talk about all the stuff that's shooting everywhere. Like talk about how it feels. Just describing like touch, taste, smell, like anything like that. It's gonna make it more immersive for the reader. It's a lot more engaging. You're gonna make them feel like they're kind of a part of it, like they're perceiving what the character perceives. It's not just like they're a voyeur watching them do it. Of course, there's nothing wrong with visually setting the scene. If your male character is like super hot and muscular or something, like feel free to mention that. Or, if you have a female character, she's got big boobs, or, she's voluptuous or something, like, yes, like say that, it's helpful for the reader to know what the people look like. But if you're going to say things like that, if you're talking about the guy being muscular, talk about how hard his muscles are when they're pressed against his partner's body. Or if you're saying the girl has big boobs or has like a curvy body, then talk about how that feels in her partner's hands as they're running their hands over her or something like that. This just elevates your descriptions into something a lot more sensual, and I think that makes it less awkward and just more engaging. Now, the fourth thing you can do to make your sex scenes less awkward is to describe thoughts and emotions. So you can go even further than just the character's physical sensations by talking about what's going on in their head. For most people, sex is tied in with emotion. I don't think there's that many people that can just go into sex without having any feeling towards it at all. Those people do exist. I know them personally. But, even if sex has a negative emotion attached to it for people, it is associated with a certain feeling. So, your characters too probably aren't just going to be mindless sex robots. So they're going to have an internal experience as well. And that's something you're going to want to describe to the reader. How do they feel about this sexual encounter, either in anticipation of it or during it or after it in the afterglow? Were they nervous? Were they excited? Or were they just so filled with lust that like they could barely think? They lost like all capacity for higher thought and just turned into an animal. Just get into the character's headspace and show what's going on during such an intimate experience. You can use this opportunity not just to talk about how characters might feel about each other, but also how they perceive themselves and their self-worth. There's a lot of vulnerability in standing naked in front of another person. So you could show a lot about the character through that. And then there's one interesting thing you could do, or at least I think is interesting. I did this for the Aetherverse. I always write in third person limited, like almost always. And what I ended up doing is in the very big sex scene, it is a plot driver. I went from third person limited where, you'd only show one character's point of view in any given scene. I then went basically to omniscient, like the two characters who originally had very separate points of view are both depicted together. Like the reader is given insight into both of their personal experiences, how they were feeling and all of this. So I expanded whose character point of view it was in that scene. I feel like if you're talking about two people becoming one like that, then it kind of makes sense to do that as well. So this is just sort of an interesting writing tactic you can take if you'd like. It can just make the sex scene even more meaningful for your characters and for the reader who's following the progress in their relationship. And then the most important thing I think you can do to make your sex scenes less awkward is to keep it relevant. Honestly, this is the most important thing to remember. Keep it relevant to the greater plot. There is no point in throwing in a sex scene if it just does nothing. At that point, it's just overindulgent and it just doesn't need to be there. You don't want to add it just for the sake of having one. All it ends up doing is objectifying your characters and making the reader wonder, like, when did this turn into a porn book? If you decided to just throw in a few random pages of smut. In the Aetherverse, in the earlier drafts, there were at least 4 sex scenes. They did not need to be there. And granted, most of them were not particularly detailed, but they didn't really serve any purpose other than making it clear to the reader that these characters look good naked. They didn't drive the plot along. They didn't add any extra characterization, again, other than saying that, you know, the president of the United Colonies has a big dick and is really muscular. So ultimately, I edited those out and left in only 2, and both of those do have some significance to the plot. One of them is super significant, and then the other one is more of just a way to show characterization. It's just showing how this one scientist and her wife managed to make their long distance relationship work when one of them is out of town or off world, off planet for a long time. So if you keep the sex scene or scenes relevant, then it'll really make it less likely that your readers are going to start questioning why they're reading it in the first place. They're not going to question your decision to incorporate that into your book. It's also going to make it less awkward for you while you're writing it, because you're going to go into it knowing that this scene is just as relevant as any other one that you've written. It's not going to feel as weird to you because you're going to know that there is a point to this. It's not just some gratuitous sex scene. You know, it's not going to stick out like a sore thumb or and stick out like anything else. So anyway, my point is that you can write a sex scene without writing erotica. It's awkward for people to write this, especially when they've never really done it before. But there's things you can do to make it a little bit less weird for you. You know, don't write porn. Don't make it too explicit. Don't make it so vulgar that people are just like, oh, like what is this? Like, this should be rated NC-17. Don't list out exactly what people are doing, like, you know, like position 1, position 2, position 3. Stick to describing like physical sensations, things that are immersive for the reader, where they're going to feel like they're part of this experience and not just a peeping Tom. You know, talk about what's going on in their head, all of that kind of stuff. This is just going to make it easier for you. It's going to make it easier for the reader. Probably not going to make it easier for your parents, but there's really nothing you could do about that anyway. And I will say this, and I feel like people probably won't ever really bring this up or mention it, but I just feel like it needs to be said. It's okay if while you're writing this, you maybe get a little heated. If anything, it just means that you did a good job, because it's kind of the point here, isn't it? So look, if you get turned on while you're writing this, like, it's okay. Don't feel guilty about it. Nothing wrong with finding your own characters attractive. God knows other people will when they start writing fan fiction about it. But anyway, keeping all of this stuff in mind is just going to make it less uncomfortable for you, and it'll make writing sex a little more like the real thing. It'll be just as enjoyable for you. So sorry to anyone who is not used to hearing me use this kind of language. I actually am fairly crass in real life, but I'm from New York and I can't help it. Profanity was my native language. But if you want to read a little more about it, I do have a blog post about it. You can find the link in the description. If you found it interesting or helpful, please like and subscribe. Follow me on social media. And as always, thank you for watching. God bless.